Alrighty, welcome everyone. We're going to be going over an intro to Advent of Code. It's going on right now. Brief introduction to what it is, and then we'll be going through some practice problems just to get you familiar with it. To get started, that's me. I'm Ben. I'm a second-year computer science student, University of Windsor. I'm also secretary for Computer Science Society. Tacos are pretty cool as well. You can reach me, Discord, fudge_cs, that's me. Email me if you want. I've also got my GitHub there. I'll post code we go through on my GitHub afterwards if you want to check it out. That's in the chat there. Thank you very much. And all right, let's jump into Advent of Code right away. So what is Advent of Code? It's a advent calendar of coding competition problems, I guess you could call it. It's been going on for, I think, the last 5 or 6 years. It goes from December 1st to the 25th every year. And the way it works is every night at midnight, you get a new puzzle, 2 puzzles, and the goal is to complete these puzzles as fast as possible. So you're kind of competing with other people if you're trying to compete. You have to complete the first puzzle in order to get to the second one. But I want to emphasize that this is definitely not something that you have to be a super elite code programmer in order to do these. It's a very beginner-friendly kind of event. You can do some of the first problems in Excel if you're really feeling it, but it's also a great way to learn a new programming language. So if you're coming from just being in your first year of university and you've only learned C and maybe you're familiar with a couple other programming languages, maybe you're not, this would be a great way to learn a new programming language. For example, Python, that's what we're going to be using later. But how can I participate? Well, if you want to just do some of the challenges, you just go to the website linked right here and you click a challenge and you just start read it over, start coding up your solutions, whatever you need to do. But if you're a computer science student, University of Windsor, you can go ahead and join our private leaderboard and compete for some prizes. We're going to be giving away a prize to the top first or second year student and the top third or fourth year student, I believe. So if you're not necessarily, if you're coming new to this, you don't have to worry about trying to go up against someone, in fourth year who's a computer science guru by now or something. You can definitely still join up on the leaderboard and start trying to collect some stars and rise through the ranks. And before we get into the programming side of things, the code for the private leaderboard is in the chat there. Before we get into the coding, quick tips. I would definitely recommend you use a high-level programming language like Python. It makes it so much easier to implement your solutions. It's almost like writing pseudocode instead of writing nitty-gritty C code. It's not what you want to do when you're trying to code something up as fast as possible. And each question comes with some sample input. You definitely want to test your solution once you're done coding it up on that sample input. Jeremy said his day one problem was done in 9 lines of Python code. It's super nice compared to opening a file and see you're going to take 30 lines running into a segmentation fault. You always want to test your solution using the sample that they give you of input and output, because if you get the question wrong, you get penalized by having to wait a minute until you can submit again, and if it's wrong again, it's 2 minutes and 3 minutes, and obviously if you're trying to get it done fast, that's not what you want. And if you're really stuck, you can go ahead and join the Discord. Quick plug for that. And we're not going to be giving out full answers. It's not in the fun of things. But definitely if you're really stuck on interpreting a question or something, feel free to ask for hints or clarification in the Advent of Code channel on Discord. So let's get into it. I'm going to go over to the Advent of Code site here. And first thing you want to do if you're just coming to this for the first time, log in using Google or GitHub or whatever you want to do. I'm going to use GitHub. I've already authenticated and all that, so I can log right in. And if you're going to join the leaderboard, go to the leaderboard tab, go to private leaderboard. This is the global one full of all the crazy people who do every question in 5 seconds. You want to compete on the CSS one. There's a code in chat for that, posted a while back, I think. You're going to put it in right here, whatever it is. And then you'll see the leaderboard right there. You can click view, and you can see we have got 40 people in here by now. That's awesome. 28 have completed at least one of the challenges so far. The challenges appear in the calendar tab, and you can see I've completed the first 2 so far. The next one comes out tonight, 5 hours, 53 minutes at midnight. If you want to see past events, click on the events tab, you go to 2020 or 2019 or 2018 or any of the past ones. And we're going to be going to the 2020 ones. And we're going to start off with day 1. Now, the challenges tend to get more difficult as it goes on. Sometimes, some days will be easier than others. But day 1 is usually a super duper nice, simple introduction. And every year they have a nice little story, kind of backstory for it. But we're going to get right into the actual puzzle of it. So after the story element, it says, okay, before you leave from wherever we are, the elves in accounting just need you to fix your expense report. And that's going to be our puzzle input. That's going to be what we have to deal with to get our puzzle output. Apparently, something isn't quite adding up. Specifically, they need you to find the 2 entries that sum to 2020, and then multiply those numbers together, and the product of those 2 numbers is what we're going to put in as our answer. So, for example, here's some sample input, and in this list, it says the 2 numbers that sum to 2020 are 1721 and 299. Okay, we need to multiply those 2 numbers together and spit that out as our answer. Okay, how do we do that with this gigantic list of numbers? This is our actual puzzle input. Obviously, you're not going to want to do that by hand. So, you could throw it in Excel if you want, or you can whip out the Python. So now that you've got your nice VS Code editor all set up from Kelly's workshops the last 2 weeks, you can go ahead and put it to use and start by, well, I've already got a file set up for it. Start by opening up a file, and we're going to call it day 1. And let's create a couple files to start. Create a sample.txt file where we're going to put our sample input. I'll go ahead and copy it from here. And then let's go ahead and Control S to save our actual input. Now I'm just going to call it input.txt. And before you do anything else, scroll to the bottom of this file and delete this last new line. Whenever you download a file, save a file, at least on whenever I've done it, it always adds a pesky new line to the end of this, and this will cause you unending grief in trying to debug your solution. So get rid of that extra new line. We just want the numbers. Try and zoom in a bit more here. And now we're going to go ahead and create a Python file. So I'm kind of assuming that you've already got Python installed. I'm not going to go through all of that stuff. There's lots of tutorials on YouTube for it. And in terms of extensions, I'm just using the default, where is it? The default Python one made by Microsoft Python, this one. And I think that typically comes with VS Code. But once you've got Python installed, it's all set up. you can go ahead and start coding with it. It's super simple. And just to preface this, I'm going to be going through the first part of this problem a lot more slowly in case you've never seen Python before. And then I'll pick up the pace a bit for the last ones. Hopefully we have time. And that way, if you're completely new to it, you can hopefully follow along for the first one and see how easy Python is. And if you're a little bit more familiar with it, maybe you'll see something new or some techniques that I do, I don't know, for the later problems. So I'm hoping to get through 2 problems. We might only get through 1.5. But let's discuss what we actually need to do here, though. So the first part that we're going to have to do is start reading in our values, right? The first problem is that we need to get these values from a file into our actual Python code. And there's lots of different ways to read files in Python, at least in terms of your overlying work around it. The simplest is to just say, okay, file, open, and then the name of the file. And in this case, I'm going to start with the sample data I have on the right here. And if I do something like this, I can then print out the contents of the file by doing file.read. And then I have to make sure I close the file. That's just very good programming practice. And I can go ahead and run that. And just scroll that down a little bit. And you can see it's just the contents of the file. This isn't the best for a couple of reasons. If something goes wrong in between opening and closing the file, you get problems. Ideally, you're supposed to handle any error that happens in here and make sure that you always close the file. And Python makes that super easy. Use a with statement. And actually, I'll keep the old code because what we're doing is exactly the same, just using a slightly different format. With the file named sample.txt opened as a variable called file, I want to print out the contents of the file. And then after this, I can go ahead and print out done, whatever. And by the time it gets to done, Python automatically handles closing the file. And if there's an error in here, it automatically handles all that. So we don't have to worry about error handling. This is the kind of way you want to open your files when you're working in Python. Okay, so we've got our file. We can read it as one giant string. Let's store it in a variable instead. And then let's start talking about what we need to do to this variable. So in order to compare every pair of numbers, because that's really what we want to do. We want to compare, these 2 numbers, and we want to compare the first number and the third number and see which pair sums to 2020. We need to kind of get it as a list of the numbers first in order to be able to iterate over them and treat them as actual integers. Because the other issue is that right now it's just one giant string. Every number is a part of the string. So Python provides a nice, easy way to split up a string into a list. And it is fittingly called the split method on a string. I can go ahead and do data.split. And I want to split it at every new line. So I want to make each element just the element on each line. And if I go ahead and print that, you see it prints it out as this list of values in square braces, which means that it is stored as a Python list. And within the list, each element is the string representation of each number. So this is the string for 979. This is the string for 366. We can't quite start adding these numbers and comparing them yet because they are strings. We need to convert them to integers first. And if you're thinking, okay, how would you do that coming from more of a C background? Well, you can loop over the entire list and just convert each one to an integer and store it in a new list. How well would Java be for this if you don't know Python? Justin asks. I think Java is another option. It's better than C because it's still a higher level language, but in Java, you're still kind of dealing with data structures and data types. And if you're familiar with Java, then by all means go for it. But Python is just, it's chef's kiss. It's so good for this kind of stuff because your solutions can be so small. Okay, we want to loop over our list of values and convert each one to an integer. So let's go ahead and create a new list. Call this int data. We'll start it as an empty list. And we'll say for each number n in our list of values in data dot split lines. And n just to show you what n is. It's the number for each one. Instead of printing it, though, we want to add it to our list of integers. So we're going to go ahead and do int data.append, add to the end of integer cast of n. And if I go ahead and print out int data at the end of that, we go ahead and we get, notice how same list, but each number is not surrounded by quotes now, which means it's an actual integer, not a string. So now we can start thinking about, okay, what is our actual solution for looping over the numbers and comparing pairs of values? And again, if you're coming from C, you're going to think, okay, I want to do 2 for loops and start, index each value and start. So for example, you want to start with this outer for loop in this first number, and then you want to compare it to all the numbers after it. So then you'd have a second for loop that says, okay, what is 1721 plus 979? And what is 1721 plus 366? And so on and so forth. So that would look like for I in range from 0 to 8 of our int data. And I will again say this is not the most Pythonic solution, but if you're coming from C, this will look a bit more familiar to you. And we don't need to include the 0 if we're starting from 0. Python will automatically assume we're starting from 0. So I'm just going to say for I in range to the length of the int data. And what does that look like? What is I? I is just a number. So range just spits out a range of numbers from 0 to the 1 minus the topmost number. And we can use this sort of like a C for loop where we index each number as we go along. For j and range, we want to start at whatever the next element in our list is. So I plus 1. And again, we want to go to the end of the int data list. And let's just go ahead and print out what is int data at I, and what is int data at j. See what it looks like. Come on, type it correctly. Go ahead and run that. So this prints out each pair of values, 1721, 979, and all the combinations values from 979 and all the combinations values for 366 and 299, and finally just one left for 675. And now we just want to add each pair of values and see if the sum is 2020. If it equals 2020, then bam, we found our two numbers. We can multiply them together and print them out. So how do we do that? We write an if statement and we say if the element, the ith element in our list plus the jth element in our list is 20, and print that I multiplied by int data. Okay. And go ahead and run that. It says, okay, here is your answer, 514,000 something something something. And if we compare that with the actual sample output, we get, yeah, that was the same thing. So maybe there is some strange bug in our program somewhere where it doesn't catch it for the sample input, but it will when we run the actual input, and maybe our program isn't correct yet, but I'd say let's go ahead and try it on the actual input, see what we get. And it says, okay, the two numbers we don't know what they are, I didn't have it printed out, but when multiplied together, the two numbers give us this as our answer. And so now we've run from this entire list. This is the product of those two numbers, whatever they may be. Go ahead and test it. And if I submit it, yeah, that was the right answer. Got 1 gold star. And now we get to continue to part 2. And part 2 is just a slight extra thing on part 1 where it says instead of every 2 numbers in your expense report, see if you can find 3 numbers that add to 2020. And then multiply those 3 numbers together and put right here. And so it's not really that much harder. We could just add another for loop here, really. We could say for k in range j to j plus 1 to the length of the list and so on and so forth. But I want to show you a more Pythonic way of doing this, and in many fewer lines of code, which isn't always necessarily a good thing. But if you can do something in fewer lines of code and make it look good, make it easier to read, that definitely is a good thing. So same as last time, for part 2, let's go ahead and open our file as inputs.txt. Actually, we'll start with the sample. Its file. Yeah, Jeremy posted something in chat there. That is definitely a nice succinct way to do it. Although I'm going to show you a different way using what's called a list comprehension, which can be useful for other aspects, and it's a little bit more readable. And so we want to do the same thing as last time, read all our numbers in as integers and split them apart, all that. But why not see if we can do it all in one line here? We did it in 4 lines before, and it's not that unreadable, but we could do it a little faster. So I'm going to start a list comprehension, and the way it works is we can kind of declare a list all in one step. So instead of declaring an empty list out here and then going through our data and appending it one by one, let's just say create our list by putting each element n in the list. And okay, what is n? So we're going to say for every n in file.read. And in fact, we want to split that file again, right? Remember, right here we did data.split. We were iterating through every string form of the number in our list. So we can chain these together and just do it all in one nice little step here. So n is going to be each number, but n is still a string. If I go ahead and run that, and then I guess I should print out data to see what it is. You can see it's a list of strings still. So how do we convert n into an integer at each step? We can just say, instead of putting n in the list, put the integer version of n in the list. And so again, the way a list comprehension sort of works is we write what we want to put in the list as the first part. We write where it's coming from as the second part. And we can actually write an if statement in here too if we wanted to say, if n is greater than 2020 or something. But we don't need that for this part. So now if I go ahead and print out data, a list of integers. And we've done all these steps now in just one step up at the top here. So we could, again, just go through our for loops over here and just add another for loop for iterating through every combination of 3 values. But I think there's a way better way to do that. And I want to show you the power of Python. It's got some built-in tools, lots of built-in tools, one of which is a tool for generating combinations of numbers. So I'm going to go ahead and import something called combinations from a module called itertools. This comes with Python. This isn't something I installed extra. And let's just take a look at what this gives us. So if I go ahead and look at for pair in all of the combinations of our data, and in fact, our data is, call it data to stay consistent with the last part. And how many elements in each combination? I want to have sets of 2 elements in each combination. Let's just print out the pairs. And you can see Python just did all of our work for us. It printed out, took all the different combinations of pairs of elements, put them in, tuples, sort of like a list, except not editable. You can't change the elements. And if we want to go ahead and get our solution from part 1, we could say if the sum of the pair of elements equals 2020, prints the pair. And again, from our sample, that was the original answer. So we can see even faster than before, in one for loop, we have managed to get this, the pair of elements that is correct. And if we want to generalize this for 3 elements, we just change one number. And instead of a pair, it's now a triple. So I'll rename the variable just to be clear. We can say which triple of 3 numbers sums to 2020. Well, it's this one. You can print it out. And we can also print out the product of those 3 numbers. So triple first element times triple of element times the third element. And if I go ahead and look at the sample that it gave us, we got what, 2 million or 24 million, 24186 something. And that is what we should get for our sample input. So I'm thinking, okay, our program is probably correct then. Let's go ahead and test it with the actual input. Hit input, run that, copy paste the answer into our code, or into the checker, and boom, we did it. So you can see that we went from doing all this in, it really wasn't that many lines compared to something like C, but it was even less so over here. And if you're familiar with Python and the syntax, it becomes so much more readable. And I think that's really the power of Python that you get. Looking at the chat, what do we got going on? Isaac said something about, the input having an extra character at the end. Definitely get rid of that. That is a huge pain if you don't get rid of it. And if I add it at the end here, just to show you what will happen, I run this. I didn't really care because I'm using combinations. If I run my first solution, it just says I'm trying to convert an empty string into an integer, and it doesn't like me doing that. And it's hard to deduce the reason why that's happening. It's like, where is there an empty string? Why is there an empty string in my input? I didn't put an empty string in there. It's because stupid downloading it did. And with that, we've completed our first day of Advent of Code. So we can go on to another challenge. I'm going to go to day 4. And it's going to get a little more difficult. We might not have the whole time to finish this one. But this one has a lot more to read, a lot more to do. So we're arriving at an airport. We're traveling on our vacation. And there's a huge lineup of people at the airport trying to check their passports. And due to some questionable network security, you realize you might be able to solve this problem by doing a little jimmy jam. And what we need to do is detect which passports have all the required fields. What are the passports? Well, that's going to be our input values. So you can see it gives us a sample of some passports. So this is the first passport data, and this is the second passport's data. This is the third passport's data. Each one is separated by 2 new lines. Right? You've got end of this line followed by the next line. And our job is to count the number of valid passports. Which passports are valid? Well, a passport is valid if all of the fields outlined up here are present in the passport. So essentially, we're going to iterate through a gigantic file of passports. Let's take a look at it. It's this giant thing. And we need to count which passports are valid. In other words, which ones have all of these fields and which ones don't. So let's go ahead and copy this sample input to a file. I'm going to go ahead and close part 1 and open up part 2, or part day 4. New file for that. We're going to go ahead and create a sample.txt file. Paste in the information from the sample. We're going to save this as a file, input.txt. And right away, open it up, go to the end of the file. Come on, scroll down. Get rid of that stupid extra new line before it makes you curse everything. And start a new Python file. And so again, for this, I'm going to go a little faster. I'm going to assume that you know a little bit more about Python, just to show you what you can do if you have some Python skills. I don't have a lot, but I have some. Going to, where is the day 4? There it is. So first things first, we need to read through our file and separate these passports. We need to kind of separate our data a little bit. And so I'm going to go ahead and open up the data. Sample data as a new file. And I'm not sure exactly what I want to do with it this time. It's not like I can just do a list comprehension and necessarily turn it all into integers. So I'm just going to save this in a variable called data. Although in fact, maybe we want to right away separate it into a list of each passport. So I want to split it into groups of, I want to split it at each double new line. So what does this give us? Print out data. This gives us a list, it's hard to read. Let's go ahead and for loop for I in data. Okay, that's a little bit better. All of our data is on new lines now, but it's hard to decipher which passport is which, right? In our sample data, you can see this is all one passport. Some of these fields, the eye color versus the color, and the passport ID versus the actual ID of it, some of them are separated by spaces, and some of them are separated by a new line. This is all one passport, and it's not consistent. So we need a way to make this a little bit more consistent. One way of doing that would be to instead make it so that all of the fields are separated by spaces. So we want to do something like this. Each passport just takes up a single line, and we want to replace each new line by a space. Obviously, I don't want to go ahead and do that by hand for all of these thousands of lines. So I'm going to write some Python code to do that for me. And I'm going to say, okay, let's go ahead and create a new, or maybe let's just reassign it to our existing list, our existing data. And I'm going to use list comprehension. And I'm going to say, I want you to put in each passport P for P in data. Haven't changed anything yet. And I want you to replace every new line with a space. And if I go ahead and print out the data now, run that, and it's a list. I need to iterate over it to make it a little bit more pretty. Now each password takes up only a single line. And we can continue to kind of work through it a little bit more. And the end goal here is to basically just get a list of the fields. In other words, the ECL and the PID and the EYR, these are all fields of each passport. I want to get a list of what each passport's fields are, and I would just want to compare it to see if it has all of these fields. Now, one thing in this problem, it said, okay, the fourth passport is missing, or rather the third passport, it's missing the field CID. But it says, ignore that. Don't worry about that. It's okay if the passport is missing the CID field. It just needs to have all these other fields on it. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this to the top of the file just to make sure we know what we're working with. This one is optional. So I'll spell that right. There we go. We need to make sure that every passport has a BYR field, an IYR field, an EYR field. And you're kind of thinking, okay, why does it have all this other data in here then? Why does it have the number for it? Why does it have the color for the hair color over here? And that kind of hints that, okay, maybe we'll need that in part 2. And one thing when you're going through these problems is that you want to try and solve part 1 in a way that it'll give you some leeway in part 2 so that maybe you're already on track for part 2. I could pretty easily just go through and discard everything after each colon in each one of these fields and just get the list of the field names and just compare that against another list. Say we have a list of required fields, and I say, okay, that's just a list of these ones. I'll type them out: IYR and EYR. And these are technical terms, by the way. Something, something, something. What's the last one? CID. We don't need CID. Should have 7 here. Yes. Okay. These are all the required fields we need as a list. And I can just say, okay, for each one of these required fields, make sure the passport has it. If it's missing a single one, don't count it. But I'm thinking, okay, for part 2, I want to have these stored in something like a dictionary. That way I can look up these values because maybe I'll need them, hint, hint, yes, you will, in part 2. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to say, okay, for each passport string, and I'll call that passport string in the data, I want to split it apart a little bit more. I want to kind of grind it down to some more parts that it's a little easier to work with. So let's create a new list. And this is where we're going to store all the passports. I'm going to start off empty. And then we're going to say, okay, for each passport string, so for each one of these lines, I want to split it apart by spaces. I want to get all of the different fields and values as a list. So let's go ahead and do that. Call it field in passport string split. I want to split it by spaces. I think by default it splits by spaces, so we don't actually need that there. Let's see what we get, and then let's print a new line. Okay, that's a little bit easier to work with. We've got all the fields for the first passport separately, and all the fields for the second passport separately, and all the fields for the third passport separately. But what I want to do is I want to store them in a dictionary for each passport, because that'll make it easier to look stuff up later on and work with it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new dictionary object, and I'm just going to call it fields dictionary and initialize it to an empty dictionary. So essentially I want to have a dictionary representation of each passport. So for each one of these fields, I want to split it apart and I want to add it to that passport's dictionary and then save that dictionary in this list of passports. So we want to split apart each field to get the first value, the name of the field, and the actual value of the field. How can you do that? Let's do some magic. Name value, 2 assignments at once, field.split. So I'm doing 2 assignments in one step here. I could have saved this to just a dummy variable called f, and then said name equals first value of f and value equals the second value of f. But we don't want to do that in Python. We want to do that the easy way. And so now I'm going to have each name and value separately. I'll go ahead and print them out. Again, this is the same output as last time, except you can see instead of colons separating each one, it's just a space indicating these are 2 separate variables. Okay. Now I want to put them in the field dictionary for each one. So we're just going to go field dictionary. And in order to add an element to a dictionary in Python, it's like a hash map in Java, different notation. But if you're coming from Java, that's what you'd be familiar with. You say, okay, the name, that's our key, and the value is just value in this case. So go ahead and print out each dictionary at the end to show you what it looks like each step of the way. And so now we've got, this kind of looks like what we had before, except the curly brackets indicate it's a dictionary. So in fact, I can say, okay, for each passport, what is the eye color? And I can run that, and it says, okay, for each passport, the first passport's eye color was gray, and then amber, and then brown, and brown. And I can also say, and this is what we're going to be using at the end, print out the keys of this dictionary. And so now I get a list for each passport. These are the fields, the field names, or the keys that each passport has. And now I just need to compare each one of these lists to my list of required fields at the top here and make sure it has them all. And okay, how can we do that? Let's go ahead and make sure we add each passport to our list of passports. And then we can say, okay, for each passport dictionary in passports, we want to check and make sure that each passport has all of the required fields. So we're going to say for required fields in required, if required field is in the passport dictionary's keys, then, well, actually we want to be checking if it's not in the keys. If it's not in the keys, we want to ignore the passport. We don't want to count it. But if it has all the fields, if we get through this entire list without breaking through the loop, it has all the fields, then we want to increase our count. Count plus equals 1. And what was this else thing I did here? This is not something I see too often in other programming languages. I'm not sure how many have a for else loop. This is not part of the if statement. This is actually part of the for loop. So what's going on here is in Python, you can have an else statement at the end of your for loop that says, if you manage to get through this for loop without breaking, which means you manage to get through the entire list of values without anything going wrong, without anything saying, okay, quit it, go to the next set of the loop, then it'll execute the code in the else statement. If instead we break out of this loop instead, then it will not execute this else statement. And the reason we need this is because if I don't put that there, and let's say instead I make it part of the if statement. Well, this kind of looks correct, but really what we're saying is if each individual field is not in the keys, then increase our count by 1. So what's going to happen is for each passport, if it has one single correct field, we're going to increase the count by 1. If it has another correct field, increase it again. And if it has a third correct field, increase it again. We don't want to count the number of correct fields. We just want to count the number of completely correct passports. So I want this back one step. So that if the entire passport is correct, then we increase the count by 1. And if I go ahead and print out the count, after this is done, should be able to run this and count as 0, which means something went wrong. Let's figure out what's going on here. Print out what is each P dictionary. Let's make sure I'm on the right track. All right, so each P dictionary is what I'm expecting. Let's see if these fields is what am I doing wrong here then? For rec in required, print rec if rec in, oh, if not, I forgot the not in. The problem was I was checking to see if it is in the keys rather than if it isn't. We want to break out of the loop and say this passport is invalid if the required field is not or is missing from the dictionary's keys. Now if I run it, we get 2. And if we look at our sample back on the website, we get that there were 2. First passport was valid, and the third passport was valid. It said the second one was invalid, and the fourth one was invalid. So we should have a count of 2. So okay, let's go ahead and run that on our actual input and see what we get. $242. Go ahead and copy that and paste it in here. Check our answer, submit, and that is the correct answer. Whew. Continue part 2. Checking the chat quickly. If you want to iterate over the keys of a dictionary, you don't need to specify dict.keys. That is true. We could have got rid of this part right here. By default, it'll just check whether it's in the keys. So I can run it again and see it's the same thing, but more explicitly, yeah, it would be iterating through just the keys. Okay, I don't know if we're going to have time to finish part 2. Have there been any questions so far about the first day or this day so far? didn't ask that at the end of the first day, but if I need to go back and explain anything, I can definitely do that. Again, there's lots of different solutions. You might not even, there might be a better built-in Python approach for doing something like this that I don't know about. But this was what came to my mind, and it's, I'd say it's pretty Pythonic in terms of using lots of iterating over the actual data itself, not iterating over ranges of numbers and indexing things using dictionaries to our advantage. And we didn't need to save things to a dictionary, like I said earlier, at each step, but we're going to see in part 2 that that is actually useful. So if we go ahead and move on to part 2, now it says, okay, invalid passports are actually getting through your security, talking about it. We can continue to ignore the CID field, but for each other field, we now need to actually look at what the contents of the field are. We need to make sure and validate each one. So it gives us the new conditions for each field here. We need to say, okay, every passport has a birth year, and the value of that birth year is 4 digits, at least 1920 and at most 2002. And issue year is 4 digits, at least 2010, at most 2002. And again, I don't think we're going to get through this entire solution, but there is a part in this where we can use regular expressions to check the validity of some input. And maybe we'll try and do some of that. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new file called part2.py. Throw it over here. And I'm going to copy what we have so far. Go ahead and copy all that. And I'm going to print in the new conditions, or copy in the new conditions at the top of the file. So have them for reference. Oopsies. And let's think about what we want to do to actually validate everything. So instead of just increasing the count by 1, if we know that the passport has all of the required fields, let's make sure that it then checks out for the actual contents of those fields. So we don't have to change our original code too much so far. Let's just say, okay, if the passport has all the required fields, let's do another thing where we say if, we'll write another function, we'll call it check. If checking the passport, if it works out properly, then we can add 1 to the count. So we're going to write a function that checks the validity of all of the fields based on all of these conditions up here. And then if it'll return true if the passport is valid, it'll return false if it is not. So let's go ahead and write that function up here. F check. And we are not going to have enough time. Maybe I can just get through a quick, how you would check a field using regular expression, like how you would check the hair color. So if we look at our sample input, you can see the hair color is in RGB color format, right? So it's a hashtag followed by 6 alphanumeric characters, right? So they can be either 6 letters from A to F or numbers from 0 to 9. And how do we check whether a string fits those conditions? Regular expressions are a great powerful tool to do something like that. So in Python, the package for regular expressions is RE. And let's say, for example, we want to check to see whether the hair color field is a correct match for each passport. So for an individual passport, the hair color field is going to be passport. So this gets this part of the string for the passport. So this will get each hashtag thing, and we need to check whether it follows the right format. So using a regular expression, there's lots of tools, resources online about how to actually format these. But I'm going to do something where I do I want to match things that follow the following pattern. re.compile a new pattern. What does the pattern look like? If we want to match a string that starts with a hashtag, the caret symbol means starts with. Hashtag is just a hashtag, that's just plain text. And then is followed by characters in the range A through F, or 0 through 9. We want up to 6 of them. And then string ends. Okay, so this is a lot of information packed into a very tight space. And if you're not familiar with regular expressions, this looks like gibberish. But regular expressions are really powerful because you can write things like this that match strings very easily and very quickly. And so what this is saying is the square bracket thing. It's kind of like saying, okay, it's going to match a single character, and we can specify which characters we want it to match. Which characters are considered valid? Which characters do we want to return true for? And in regular expression syntax, we can write a dash to specify that, okay, any letter from the range A through F is valid. I could just write A, B, C, D, E, F. Similarly, for numbers, I could write 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And what we're saying is if we hit a letter that is any of these, that's valid. And we want up to 6 of them. And how can we use this? Well, we want to see if it's a match. So we're going to say pattern.match the hair color. And if matches, then that's okay. If it doesn't match, then return false. So essentially we're saying if the hair color does not follow this kind of format, this pattern, and this $sign just means that it has to be the end of the string. So it has to be, there can't be any extra characters at the end of the string. It has to be just 6 hashtag followed by 6 characters in either of these, followed by, that's it. That's the end of the string. So if we're saying if the pattern matches that, if the hair color falls into this pattern, that's okay. If it doesn't, then we're going to return false. And I guess I could even run a couple little tests so we can see in our sample input which one would be invalid. Let's get some different sample input from website quickly, format at a time. Or maybe I'll just make one up. Maybe I'll just edit it. So in our sample, the first passport was valid before, but if I change this to be hair color to be hashtag 12GH, that's invalid because it's only 4 characters and you can't have a G or an H. And so if I try our code on this and I print out passports that fail, true otherwise. I need to test this on the sample. you can see that right here. Where was it? Apparently none of them match. What am I doing? Don't want to print out the count. Just print out this, and then, okay, just have it exit. I have confused myself by my own code, as usual. But essentially, this is how you would check the hair color using a regex or a regex pattern. I don't actually know how to say that. I think it's regex, regular expressions. And you could do something similar for the passport ID. So if you wanted to check that it's a 9-digit number in the range, it doesn't give a range, it just says including zeros. You could do something like \D. That's a simple way of typing any digit from 0 to 9. And if we want 6 of them, or 9 of them in this case, it could be something like that. 9 digits, at least 0 or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, 8 or 9. And for the eye color, you wouldn't need regex for that necessarily. The height has a cool regular expression you could do for that, but I don't have time to get into it. Isaac in the chat says, much more readable for the hexadecimal regex. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree that something like E through F or 0 to 9 would be much more readable for matching the hexadecimal, the eye color one. But I am out of time. I think we are past the time for this workshop. So thank you for coming on out. If you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. Again, I'll be throwing my code on GitHub if you want to see the solutions. I'll throw the full solution for this code on GitHub actually. Oh yeah, and definitely check out. I can open it. The link Isaac just posted in the chat there. There's a lot of resources online for actually testing your regular expressions. So for example, I could type something like the one I had before, which was hashtag followed by 0 through 9, A through F. 6 of them. And I can type in a string. I can test it, right? So I can type in a hashtag F2345. And that's a correct string. Or I could type in, that is not a correct string. And this is a great tool to kind of test your regular expressions to see what works, what doesn't as you're developing them. You can also do, you can make sure that we have the caret at the front and dollar sign or the dollar sign at the end. Because the problem right now, if I don't include those two, is I could type something before this, something after it, and there's a chance that it could find it in between these two. And we only want to match complete. We only want to match it when it's just this string. We don't want to match anything else around it. All right. Thanks for coming out, everyone. I don't know if we'll be back next week. Maybe we'll do some more problems if people want to see them or whatnot. Hopefully everyone is going to be participating in Advent of Code again. Check out the leaderboard, join the leaderboard, compete for prizes. Wonder if anyone else has joined since I started this. Let's see. Private leaderboard, you. We've got, 40 still. But next challenge is going to be out in a couple hours at midnight tonight. 2021 events. And hope to see everyone there. So have a good night, everybody.